It wasn't an algorithm. You need to understand that first. The images and sounds you were shown, the cryptic numbers that appeared in your recommendations, that was a signal, a tuning fork resonating with something already inside of you. You were chosen because you are one of the few who senses that the reality we see is just a fraction of the whole story, a beautiful, hypnotic, but fragmented echo. For months, you've been collecting those echoes, feeling their power without understanding the source. Consider this video the first translation of that source. This is not another theory or a guess. This is the blueprint, the very architecture of the philosophy you've been subconsciously drawn to. What you are about to see is the key that elevates you from a mere spectator of the mystery to an active participant in its unfolding. The puzzle pieces are in your hands. Now, let's begin to assemble them.
Consider the psychology of impossible decisions. There are moments when the human mind simply halts before a crossroad that is not truly a crossroad at all. You feel a barely perceptible suspension where no direction seems walkable and the air itself grows denser, as if time had suddenly decided to hold its breath. This is not ordinary hesitation, nor the banal kind of everyday indecision. Rather, but the awareness that whichever step you take will betray an invisible, essential part of yourself. This dark cartography of the mind does not belong to standard manuals of behavioral technique, for within it you will encounter dilemmas no calculation can resolve, and enigmas that even the rigorous languages of mathematics cannot dissolve. It is a choice that turns in on itself, much like a Mobius strip. You walk along its surface convinced you have crossed over to the other side, yet you arrive precisely where you began. It is a topological illusion, certainly, but one that manifests as fully real. The body notices it before the mind, the hand that does not move, the throat that remains closed, the gaze that slips outward and then retreats as if the horizon had been sealed. Behind this numbness lies not just emotional tension, but very specific neurodynamics of signals repeating without exit, cortical regions firing in direct contradiction to one another, and cognitive processes unfolding into a spiral rather than yielding action. The brain itself builds its very own enclosure, and yet, the society that surrounds you makes no allowances for this kind of suspension, pushing you relentlessly to choose, to decide, and to keep moving. Every cultural message or productive logic celebrates rapid decision-making as an ultimate sign of strength. Almost no one speaks of those quiet, strange moments when the internal structure halts, when the act demanded cannot be carried out without instantly denying itself. It is like asking a flame to cease burning. In such moments, you realize this is not an accidental deviation, but a deeper law. Here again, we encounter what we talked about in previous episodes, maps that fold back on themselves. These impossible decisions always return, taking on different forms while revealing the exact same curvature, proving that every choice folds inward and every gesture carries its own contradiction. As the maps of the mind begin to fold, familiar territories completely dissolve, leaving behind no true linearity, but only a deep circularity hiding patiently beneath the grand illusion of the straight path. Formal systems of logic know this boundary well, recognizing that every rigorous framework inevitably carries undecidable propositions, entire regions of discourse that stubbornly refuse to come to a close. It is like constructing a flawless building, only to discover that within it there will always remain inaccessible rooms. The human mind reflects this exact same architecture. Whenever you attempt to extract absolute clarity, shadowy passages emerge that remain outside your understanding, revealing fractures that no coherence can ever seal. You do not need to study abstract models to perceive this truth. In everyday life, you execute choices that do not erase your doubt, but merely multiply it. Whether agonizing over the decision to speak or to remain silent, standing in a doorway deciding to stay or to leave, or choosing to act rather than to wait, you intuitively understand that every single direction carries unavoidable loss. Thus, the act of choosing becomes not a true liberation, but a revelation of its own impossibility. These folding maps are your inner landscape. You walk the corridors of your own thought, searching desperately for an opening, and instead find rooms that simply close in on themselves, where every footstep becomes an echo and every promised exit a return. This is not an error, but the natural condition of consciousness. Thought advances only by stumbling blindly forward, existing only because it is willing to bend. The strangest paradox of all is that this very collapse eventually becomes its own form of movement. What appears as a complete blockage is, in reality, a hidden dynamic, a continuous oscillation between opposing alternatives that simultaneously cancel and regenerate one another. From this friction arises a highly peculiar equilibrium, much like that of the skilled tightrope walker who does not fall precisely because they keep moving, surviving only because they accept the absolute necessity of oscillation. In the end, you realize that the impossible is not an exception, but the silent rule structuring every choice. Error is not a deviation from the path. It is the center of the journey. This is no forecast of catastrophe, but a recognition that every path is built with a built-in fracture, much like a stone bridge that holds together precisely because its heavy arch perfectly distributes the cracks. The mind does not collapse because it fails. It collapses because its very functioning is based on failure as an original condition. Choice simply becomes a continuous oscillation, a weary but beautiful dance between alternatives that constantly cancel each other out. Within this frustrating impossibility of fixing a definitive point, a paradoxical balance appears. It is never the stable equilibrium we imagine, but rather the highly unstable one that keeps the tightrope walker upright solely through a perpetual, perilous sway. The inevitable error of a wrong decision is not a failure, but a necessary breath, a vital wave that runs constantly through the nervous system and keeps it alive. If you were truly perfect, you would be paralyzed, and if you were truly linear, you would simply cease to move altogether. It is the awkward stumble that creates your forward continuity, and the hairline microfracture that ultimately grants you flexibility. Perhaps your actual task is not to decide things in relentless search of a final solution, but rather to linger patiently within the interval, within that suspended, magical instant in which competing possibilities violently neutralize one another. You are not meant to force the map into straightness, but to willingly inhabit its natural curvature, not to definitively seal the labyrinth, but simply to listen to your own footsteps reverberating through its corridors. The true exit is not a physical threshold waiting to be found, but the quiet recognition that every single threshold you cross will eventually fold back upon itself. Thus, this balance of error becomes your greatest compass, not a reliable needle pointing steadfastly toward a fixed point, but a constant, living pulse in your hand. It does not guarantee safety, but maintains your forward motion. It does not promise coherence, but graciously allows for your persistence. And if you finally stop to listen, you will realize that all you are is nothing but this, a complex weave of inevitabilities which have generated your unique trajectory. It is not linear, perfect or logical, but undeniably real. And perhaps that is enough. To carry the folded map in your pocket without the neurotic need to open it, knowing full well that within those folds you will never find the definitive solution, but only the continuous breath of movement. It is a breath that does not interrupt the dilemma of your existence, but simply transforms it, slowly, into a sustained rhythm. See you in the next episode.